The US imposed 50% tariffs on $20 billion worth of Canadian goods, and Canada will retaliate with tariffs matching them dollar for dollar, effective September 8. The US imposed 50% tariffs on $20 billion worth of Canadian goods, covering sectors including wine, furniture, dairy, cement, clothing, fishing rods, and hockey equipment. The US tariffs cover $20 billion worth of Canadian goods, including wine, furniture, dairy, cement, clothing, fishing rods, and hockey equipment. Canada will impose retaliatory tariffs on US steel, dairy, appliances, agricultural equipment, pulp and paper, and electronics, effective September 8. The US tariffs took effect at 4:00 GMT on Saturday, following a midnight deadline in Eastern US time. The US tariffs came into force at 4:00 GMT on Saturday, after the midnight deadline in Eastern US time. Now, the collapse. Trade negotiations between the US and Canada collapsed Friday night, shortly before a midnight deadline for the tariffs to take effect. Now, the U.S. Trade Rep's statement. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer stated on Saturday that no new talks are planned with Canada. Now, the U.S. perspective on the collapse. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer said Canada declined to finalize the trade deal under the terms agreed earlier this week. Now, the Canadian perspective on the collapse. Prime Minister Mark Carney stated that the US proposed terms were uneconomic, unfair, and undermined the net benefits for Canada. Now, the specific US demands. Carney alleged that the US demanded restrictions on Canada's ability to forge new trade deals and threatened Quebec culture. Carney alleged that the US sought to restrict Canada's ability to forge new trade deals and made threats to Quebec culture. Now, the US counter-accusation. Greer stated that Canada made new demands and walkbacks of other commitments that appended the negotiations. Now, the US offer. Greer said the US had offered to cut tariffs on steel, autos, and lumber, and to provide a historic economic and national security partnership. Greer stated that the US had offered to cut tariffs on steel, autos, and lumber. Now, the US perspective on the deal. Greer said Canada had always had the best deal and could have had an even better deal if it had accepted the terms. Now, the Canadian government's statement on the talks. Carney said Canada had been pragmatic, patient, and persistent in negotiations. Now, the Canadian government's statement on the retaliation. Carney stated that Canada would match those tariffs dollar for dollar to protect our workers and businesses. Now, the date of the retaliation. Carney announced that the retaliatory tariffs would take effect on September 8. Now, the US tariffs amount. France 24 reported that the US imposed 50% tariffs on $20 billion worth of Canadian goods. France 24 reported that Canada vowed to match the US tariffs dollar for dollar. Whether the US tariffs will lead to job losses.